Aussie Gold, nature's little helper. The good oil, your first aid kit in a bottle. Tea tree oil. There are almost 300 varieties of Melaleuca alternifolia, commonly known as tea tree in Australia. But the foliage of a single type only is distilled to retract the wonder oil that has earned itself so many nicknames. To unlock the mystery of it, we travel all the way to its native Australia and bring you a truly wondrous story. The origin of the term tea tree dates back to the late 1700s. Captain James Cook came upon groves of trees thick with sticky aromatic leaves, and when boiled by the indigenous Aboriginal tribes, rendered a spicy tea, hence the name tea tree. In 1925, Arthur Penfold, a chemist, published research from an independent study showing that the antiseptic activity of the distilled oil from the Melaleuca alternifolia was up to 13 times greater than that of carbolic acid, then a well-known germicide. General practitioners use the oil in treating throat infections, uncleaned wounds, and fungal infections. 1939, the outbreak of World War II. The Australian government commandeered all stocks of tea tree oil for the military and supplied all their Pacific troops with tea tree oil in their first aid kits. Tea tree cutters were exempted from military service. During the war, synthetic penicillin gave rise to the staunch belief in the wonder of modern drugs. Natural medicines and remedies were again pushed to the back of the medicine cabinet. Tea tree oil became hard to come by and was considered to be out of fashion. The trees were now regarded as a pest, and wetlands were targeted for drainage, landfill, and restoration into low-grade farmland. Eventually, tea tree and its corresponding information became nothing more than a mere museum record, and many plantations were ploughed back into the ground. Its prolix reintroduction to the world, however, is an extraordinary tale of a man's quest, his son's belief, and the woman that stood by him on their life's journey of determination and perseverance in the face of adversity.
My stepfather, Eric White, was a real adventurer. All his life he was questing, and that led him to Africa.
We were all born in Africa, where we came from Kenya, Nairobi, the four of us children. And Eric and Mum decided to emigrate in early 1961 to Australia.
And we got off the migrant boat arriving in Perth. Eric said to us, all four children, and he said, "This is our new home. We will be greatly appreciative of having the opportunity to live in this wonderful country." And he said, "One day I'm going to find something special in this country and give that back to the world as a gift for the kindness of having us come to Australia."
And I remember very clearly one day in summer, that summer of 1962, Eric was out in the garden and got bitten by a funnel-web spider.
He knew immediately that this was a bad bite. They hurt like hell. More than that, they are life-threatening, dangerous spider. And he had been bitten on his foot, and it had swelled up almost immediately, and he was in great pain. He realised my mother would probably panic if he ran in and said, "I might die, I've got a spider bite. What do I do?"
He walked next door to his next door neighbour in Pymble, and his name is Brian.
And Brian said, "Quick, take you to the hospital, we've got antivenines, if we get there in time, you'll be fine." Racing him down the highway, Brian said, "It's extraordinary, but with the notes I've just been reading about tea tree oil, if I had a bottle of tea tree oil with me today, that's the first thing I'd do. I'd put it on that spider bite, because everything I read about that product tells me it's extraordinarily useful for this sort of treatment and many other similar conditions."
Got to know Brian a bit better over the months that followed, and found that Brian was
a research chemist based at the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences in Sydney.
And he and Eric got to know each other pretty well, and he sort of said to Eric, he said, "I wish somebody would have the courage to develop a plantation with these trees."
Eric took a decision to just actively pursue this idea.
He determined to try something that nobody else had started, And he heard from Brian that nobody wants to take it on. It was too expensive for the government to venture into growing that tree.
And he worked with Brian. He said, look, if we collaborate, if you will help me do the research and identify the highest quality product, I want to go out and see if I can revive what seems to have been a wonderful product.
It took about 3 or 4 years before he finally got his objectives, his goals achieved, and that was to identify a block of land.
And he did that by getting government ordnance survey maps, the kind the army use when they're doing bivouacs across the country. And when he reached the end of the line, as far as a four-wheel drive could take him, he would then get out and start walking into the swamp, often wading in water almost up to his waist, to find these beloved tea trees. And he would describe the trees in his note. And when he found a stand of really beautiful trees, he would then take a sample, put this into a brown paper bag to keep it breathing, seal it up, put a special code on it, and at night he'd take out his little homemade distillation apparatus, steam it up, take out the few precious drops of oil, and he would record the quantity of oil that you would get, because we're looking for high quality and high quantity yielding plants to make a very abundant supply. And when he found high quantity, he then sent those samples down to Sydney, and Brian would then map what is the quality, what is the highest terpenine 4-ol content of that tea tree. When you started to look at the map over many, many hundreds of samples, you realise it was like a bullseye, that in the centre was a very special zone of high quality, high yielding trees, and as you moved away in any direction, moving north, west or south along the coastline, more and more of the trees were lower yielding or poorer quality. Bungawalbin wetland is 9 times the size of Sydney Harbour, underground. It is a vast wetland area.
On this very swampy site stood the largest and most majestic of all the medicinal tea trees.
And it happens to be the place where the heart of tea tree has emerged as the very best medicinal variety. So Eric focused himself. That's where I have to be. If I'm going to make the best tea tree, I have to go to where the best comes from, and I will replicate nature in its home where it wants to be.
There he then applied to the Crown Lands Department for a 99-year lease.
They nearly fell off their chairs. They said, "You're mad? Tea tree's a weed. That's the thing we're trying to get rid of." Eric said, "No, you don't understand. This is a special tree for Australia. We have to preserve and protect it."
And he waited 4 years, and when he got it, it was a Thursday. He said, "That's what we're going to call the company, Thursday Plantation." And that was the beginning of it.
He took an early retirement, he cashed in his pension checks, and he put all that money together to try to bring up the world's first ever tea tree plantation.
We did everything we could to stop him. And the more we did, he was determined. He said, "The more you tell me not to, I'm going to grow this tree."
And he said, "This is it. This is my future. I'm going to live here and grow this fantastic weed in this swamp." We thought, oh boy. So there's a little apprehension there and a little sense of, well, I'm glad it's him, not me, you know, good luck. And
he had many problems. He had, the first time he planted several thousand seedlings, and he put plastic over the top to germinate them quickly, and forgot to take them off one day and burnt the lot. And then he had floods of 10 feet high over the small trees.
When Eric finally got some oil produced, around about that time, Christopher had decided to chuck in his daytime job.
I wanted to go and find out what to do. And I went off to, as we did in those days, to Nepal. I went to
Asia and through South Africa and Kenya, back to our birthplace. And during the course of his travels, he picked up some very nasty infections in his toenails.
It was actually on the bed of my nail. It was an irritation right around the edge of my toenail, not actually in the cleft here. And I didn't pay it much mind. I'd scratch it, it'd itch, I'd let it, you know, hope it would go away. Eventually I realised it was getting worse. It was starting to bleed a bit. It was a bit sore. I would go and get treatments wherever I could. I went to pharmacies. I went to all the medical places that along the journey that I could find in these various little villages in Africa. I got advice from my friends who told me all sorts of extraordinary things, like pour Coca-Cola on it, or put salt on it, or try this. I won't say all of the things they told me to do.
He tried everything to try to fix it, but nothing was working. He tried salves and lotions and creams and whatever.
I tried all modern Western treatments.
And by the time he got to London, which is where his destination was, he was hobbling. He was in so much pain. So he made an appointment with a Harley Street specialist.
Doctor looked at me and said, yes, we've identified it, we know what it is, and I can tell you it's incurable. There is no treatment for this particular fungal infection that you've got. It's a type of paronychia, but nothing we have works, no antibiotic powders work on it, and the only treatment I can offer you today would be into hospital. We give you a general anaesthetic, we will surgically remove the 3 toenails, scrape the epithelium. He said, if we miss any of the cells that contain this, it will recur. So I can't guarantee that's a total cure. If we have to, we'll remove the bed of the nail. If infection's in there, you'll have no nails back. So you'll have little stumps for toes. And it's a painful operation, and you'll need to be in the hospital when we do it.
At the same time, in 1978, Michael, my other brother, had arrived in London with his audio business.
I wasn't even aware that he got word that I had this problem.
And he had taken with him a bottle of tea tree from Eric's plantation, one of the very first batches that Eric had produced.
Eric had somehow got a message to him and said, I wanted you to take some tea tree oil anyway when you travel to show people. Maybe you'll be able to give some to Chris.
So somewhat sceptically, Chris put the oil on the toes.
And within 10 minutes, I had this soothing, calming feeling. I had this sense of relief from always wanting to scratch it, always a burning, itching feeling.
He kept on applying the oil for the next 3 to 4 days, and by the time he was ready to see the specialist in 4 days' time, his nails had complete remission. There was a complete clear-up.
I had now had the world's expert tell me I had an incurable condition, and I had just seen an effect with this oil, which, having tried 100 other things, I knew was significantly making a difference. And it just lodged with me. It took a while, I'm a bit slow sometimes.
And then we began talking about this idea of, well, why don't we go up to the farm and stay with Eric?
It was a couple of weeks, even a month later. I was travelling around Europe with my wife. We had a 6-month-old baby. We were just exploring. We were in Greece at the time. And I was thinking, what will I do with my life? And it suddenly occurred to me, there's my dad, out there in the bush. Everyone thinks he's nuts, working his butt off on his own to bring this product to the world. I've just seen what it can do.
And that was the turning point as far as Chris was concerned. He said, I now know what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. He says, I'm going to go back to join Eric in the bush in Bungawalban and help him to develop this industry and get this plantation going.
When I rang and finally put through to my mother, it took 2 or 3 hours from the Greek telephone exchange, I caught her coincidentally at the moment she walked back into the house from having been at the hospital in intensive care, prior to intensive care, as my father went into major open heart surgery. Eric had just been rushed down in the last couple of days from having a stroke and a heart attack. And he was having major bypass surgery.
And Chris was very torn at the time.
My mother said to me on the phone, darling, I have to tell you there's no chance this project could go on. He has lost all his money. His tea tree crop has failed twice in a row. He had basically broken his heart. And he had decided, life had decided for him. He was now broke and very sick. And she said, it's over. There will be no tea tree plantation. And not so slowly this time, the wheels started to turn, and I realised it doesn't have to be over. Someone's got to do this job. Someone needs to be in that. And I said, look, I'm getting on a plane and we're coming back. So we cashed up our last traveller's cheques. We just had enough money with $100 left over to buy a ticket back to Australia. We arrived in Australia absolutely penniless.
We got there and it was just a tractor shed and a tank, and there was nothing in it because we'd brought some chairs and couches and bed and everything with us. So we just got out a mattress to sleep on the floor.
And Eric taught me everything he knew. He shared absolutely openly with me, knowing that he was never going to be able to go on with this project. He wanted to give me all the knowledge that he had, and he taught me how to select the seeds, how to cure them and treat them, to get them ready for planting. He taught me how to raise the little seedlings. His vision was to grow vast plantations of this high quality oil, and he started the seed firmly in me to get this tea tree business off the ground.
There was a strong element of it that almost like I was playing, because it was setting up, it was like being on a camping trip, except it was going to be permanent.
And we lived in this wilderness that I had first feared. I had not liked this land when I first saw it. It wasn't an instant love affair.
Everything from scratch I had to invent, and I didn't have any of the skills required for doing this. And here I was in the bush with my first child and bad at everything I tried to do. Completely incompetent. Had to learn to light a fire.
I mean, living in the floods was actually some of the highlights of my life. Some of the most wonderful times of our early married life was experiencing this extraordinary power and beauty of nature.
Every single thing I did in those days, especially in that first year in the shed, was just hard work.
Now I wasn't using my brain so much, I was using my body. It was a whole different experience for me. Cutting tea tree, carrying it in bags, putting it in a still.
Waking up in the morning and thinking, how many hours is it going to be until I can be back here lying down again with so much, just so much.
Just that whole integration of purpose in your life with something really meaningful was just a reward in itself.
Mind you, as time went along, we made it very, very comfortable. My family were they were on the lookout. The bulletin went out through the whole family. Anything you've got, you don't throw it away. You send it to Linda. Maybe she can use it.
And every day at the end of a hard day's physical work, where you'd really worked your guts out, you sat around the fire as the sun was setting and you felt this wonderful richness of tea tree oil being produced in trickling distillation vessels there. And we would scoop it off litre by litre and put it in big glass bottles and carry this precious cargo off to the shed to filter it and clean it. And we started to try to share it.
So I began to have experiences with using tea tree oil and just being completely amazed at what a difference it made to my life to know that I didn't have to worry about tropical ulcers and things.
In fact, in the very early days, I thought, as Eric thought, all we had to do was produce tea tree oil and the world would rush to us. Of course, I produced the first 13 gallons of tea tree oil, which was a lot of work, weeks of hard slog to produce this, and I very proudly took my drum of oil off to try to sell it in the marketplace. And I went to all the essential oil agents. There were 4 of them in Australia who bought essential oils. One after another, they just laughed at me. They said, "What the hell are you producing tea tree for? Who wants tea tree oil? I can't get rid of this stuff. It's been sitting around in my back shed for 4 years. There's no demand for it. It's been off the market for 15, 20 years. What are you doing?"
We'd encounter other people living in very similar conditions. Very hard to keep clean. You can't keep the children clean. You can't keep yourself clean. And it meant so much to me to be able to keep my child safe.
And I said, you're mad. You don't understand. They said, no, there's no market for this stuff. Forget it. One of the 4, to his credit, said, "Well, look, I've got no market for tea tree oil, but I'll do you a favour. If I take it and I blend it with some eucalyptus oil, I can sell it off as a eucalyptus blend and no one will know, and it's a bit the same. And I'll give you," I think he offered me $9 a kilo.
And I just could see all around me people who needed it so badly. And I had a very strong sense that if we packed up and went home, nobody else was going to do this thing. And you know, life is never always smooth, and sometimes I would get to the point, and Chris too, we would get to the point of saying, this is just too hard.
And I said, you just don't understand this. I turned to the guy and I said, look, the next time you want tea tree oil, it'll cost you $18 a kilo. I'm doubling the price immediately, and it will only be available in my brand. I'm no longer offering bulk tea tree oil because nobody is appreciating what this was about.
So we'd encountered a lot of hardship, and for me, a big part of it was feeling a very great sense of purpose of what we needed to give to the world, and also a strong feeling that as long as I was with Chris, as long as we were together, there would be never anything that we couldn't conquer.
It's one of those wonderful things. You get a slap in the face sometimes, a real adversity, because I'd worked for a year to try to get to this point and then was told a complete waste of time. And it forced me to rethink my whole strategy. And I went to the local chemist, I bought 100 little bottles.
I went to the newsagent and bought a packet of stickers and packet of coloured pencils and sat down.
By night in a kerosene lantern, we drew our little labels on and we drew the messages.
On the back, 100% Australian pure tea tree oil, antiseptic, fungicide, germicide, apply direct or dilute with vegetable oil, cuts, burns, bites, scrapes, coughs, colds. Stuck that on the back and drew a tree and wrote pure tea tree oil on the front.
We made up some boards.
And we took it into the local community centre, roneoed it off on the spirit duplicator.
And we went to the local flea markets, the hippie markets up near Nimbin.
We took the fold-up table was the table we had in our little house, and our chairs. We dismantled our house virtually into the car.
I was able to put the tea tree oil on the table and talk to people eye to eye and say, you've got to try this.
And we sold 7 bottles.
I sold 7, and they more or less took it out of pity for me, I'm sure. They said, oh well, we'll give it a try, $2, who cares? But the beauty is the next time I went back to that market.
And the same people came back and bought those bottles, and one for their friend.
I want one for my mum, I want one for my husband.
One for their auntie and one for the person they'd been talking to who needed something like this, and we sold 30 bottles, and that's when we knew.
It was all about, this is amazing, and that was the start of a total realisation that we had something and we could really take this to the world if we could get it in enough hands. Of course, as we evolved in developing tea tree, we learned a lot about distillation technology. What we inherited was a system that was basically from the turn of the century and had not changed. They were old steel tubs that were just stuck over a fire whacked underneath a foot of water which was boiled, and the steam went up through the charge of leaf which was suspended over the water on a cradle. And the steam would race through, capturing the oil glands and take that off into a cooling jacket of cold water in a metal tube, and the two liquids, now oil vapour and water vapour, would come out the end and as a distillate. Oil would naturally separate and float from the water, so it was very easy to separate them at that point, and we would skim off the oil and take it away. One of the problems was we found a lot of bush cutters like to speed things up. What this meant was much hotter fires were being put in and people were really starting to cook the oil. We picked this up very quickly, and it's what happens if you overheat the firebox. You produce a byproduct that metabolises some of the oil into butyric acid. It's a potent, pungent, ugly smelling aroma and unpleasant, and an evidence of denatured oil. We realised that there was probably a lot more going on that we needed to understand, so we started to refine our knowledge about distillation. First thing we did, we brought everybody back to some basic rules about very gentle, slow fires that produced a nice even flow of steam. We moved from direct fired stills, which is quaint technology, but it's very old-fashioned, into steam generated where you had control. The earliest bits of distillation produced lots of the very desirable terpene 4-ol, which is the high medicinal value. But if you cooked it longer and longer and longer, and you cooked too long, You got some very undesirable heavy phenols and tarry creosote type products at the end of the distillation. But in fact we realised that last hour of distillation was contaminating the oil. So again we set up very tight standards about the heat, the temperature, the timing, and when you must cut the oil. We also realised you could rectify the stills much better by reticulating the water back in, what's called cohabiting the still. You would bring a more abundant oil out the next time it went through, because it was now saturated in the oil. It carried more oil to be released. That was a start of a process. I then realised there was a lot more to do on this, and we started to get research done. We got experts involved.
At that time, the understanding was that tea tree oil was used in small quantities as a flavour enhancer for orange juice and spicy meat in the American fast food market.
I said, this is a ridiculous understanding of what this oil is about. It is so wonderfully therapeutic. So I then went to the other extreme and wrote down every one of the therapeutic indications that had been researched, trialled, and tested by many doctors and many wise scientists back in the 20s and the 30s. And that became the list of uses that I wanted tea tree to be known for. It took me 14 months. I had to go through 2 ministers. I badgered them. But the thing I found was I eventually got them using the oil. And that's when I saw conversion in their understanding. What had happened, we'd cut through the mindset. You get past the bureaucratic backlog of, is this evidence strong enough, is it not, when you get to the heart of people and they sense and feel and touch what this is really all about. And to me, that's been the whole story of tea tree oil. The very first thing we ever had to do was get it in people's hands and say, try it for yourself. If there's one thing I'm really proud of about Thursday Plantation and its history, is this striving towards an excellence in product and a consistency. And I can say with great confidence that the oil, year in, year out, year after year, has maintained extremely high standards of high quality.
One of the problems with it is that it has so many applications, and sometimes it's hard for people to comprehend that you can have this one bottle and do so many different things with it.
The best way to understand how to use tea tree oil and what it's good for is to understand why it works. And let's go there first. Tea tree works, there's 3 things you need to remember. They're pretty simple. Tea tree kills bugs, and it kills them fast, and it's very effective. Proven fact. So it kills bacteria, kills fungi, it's even antiviral. It works on a broad spectrum across the range, and it works in a test tube, and it works on your skin. Second important point of tea tree, it's deep penetrating. It gets right inside to the root of problem. And the third wonderful property of tea tree is it's soothing. It takes pain out of things. It takes that burning, hot, angry feeling out of wounds and cuts and infections. Put those 3 properties together and you start to realise you don't just keep your tea tree in the cupboard for that one problem. It's a first strike against the myriad of things that hurt, things that infect, things that cause pain. And seriously, if it's not effective in a very short time, because tea tree, if it works, works quickly. It's not something you need months and months to be finding out if it's going to work. You'll either get an effect and know within often hours, certainly days, and within a week, if you're not seeing a result, I don't think you should be using tea tree oil.
More than 2 decades later, their vision remains the same. What has evolved is a much deeper understanding, appreciation, and an insight for living naturally.
In our early days, in our first year, we had a vision that there would be a bottle of tea tree oil in every house in the world. And I guess we're still working on that plan because it hasn't happened yet. And it's our mission that natural health products like tea tree oil are the first option when you go to the doctor. And if that doesn't work, then you might have to go to antibiotics or other more aggressive synthetic medicines, which have a wonderful place and save many, many lives, but are so overused. My definition of the day I knew we were succeeding, I was able to go into Lismore and go to Kmart and buy brand new pyjamas for every one of my children, the whole 3 of them, on the same day.
First at the Shannon Market, as I sat at the table of this little hippie market, the first little flea market with our hand-drawn bottles, and we sold with hard work the first 7 bottles. And when I went back the next month and I sold 30 bottles, with half the effort, my eyes opened. I said, the whole world has pimples and cold sores and tinea and itches and rashes and things, and they're never going away. They're part of human nature. And I have a treatment that is the world's best for these sorts of things. And that's when, for me, the possibility was unlimited. There is a chance to put a bottle in everybody's home around the world and make a real contribution to this planet.
I always believed out there we didn't own that land, and nobody can own that land. That land owned us. And there are ways in which that land still owns me, even though I haven't been there in 14 years.